Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters. I'm your host Mitch, glad to have you here. Here at the Commander's Quarters, we're all about Commander on a budget. Today's episode is going to be a $50 deck tech. When I say $50, I mean that is an overall deck cost. Both shipping and commanders that are $10 or less are going to be included in that cost, but basic lands will not be. Decks on this channel are built to be fun, inexpensive, and focused. If you want to learn more about what a focused commander deck is, check out this video here. On this deck tech, I'm going to take you through its strategy, the tactics, and how this deck wins. This show and episodes like this one are possible because of viewers like you. So if you're looking for some easy ways to help support the show, make sure you like this episode and share it with friends. And make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Thank you to everyone who's already purchased our merchandise, it really does help support the channel. Another easy way to support this channel is by using our TCGplayer affiliate links. So make sure that you're looking for those links in the description whenever you're buying a deck or just individual cards. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all of their support. And this episode's actually a patron selected deck tech. Once a month, patrons get to vote on what commander that they'd like to see in an upcoming deck tech. Whatever commander gets the most votes, wins. So today's commander is Kenrith the Returned King. Kenrith is a 5/5 human noble that costs 4 and a white. He's got a ton of abilities, so here we go. For a red, all creatures gain trample and haste until end of turn. For 1 and a green, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. For 2 and a white, target player gains 5 life. For 3 and a blue, target player draws a card. And for 4 and a black, put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under its owner's control. Now, Kenrith can definitely benefit you with his abilities, but he can also benefit your opponents too. This makes him a fantastic commander for a political control deck. He's especially effective because he gives you access to all 5 colors. So essentially you can use Kenrith's abilities as a bargaining chip. You can help your opponents beat up each other and stay alive yourself. Giving one of your opponent's creatures trample and haste for the turn can help them attack big out of nowhere. You can also pump their creatures or pump a defending player's creatures too. You can even help keep someone alive by gaining them life. Or you can help them dig deeper into their deck or get something back onto the battlefield. With Kenrith in play, you can pretty much always make a deal with someone. Now, because this isn't a group hug deck, you might seem like you're not trying to win, but you actually are behind the scenes. You're going to play the politics game and then eventually take the game over. Once you're set up correctly, a couple of Kenrith's abilities can actually be very deadly to your opponents. In some ways, he might seem harmless, but he is definitely not. So our strategy for this deck is to ramp to give us as many political options as possible. The faster that we ramp, the more access that we have to use Kenrith's abilities. We're going to use these abilities to protect ourselves on top of helping our opponents defeat each other. And then how do we win with this deck? We're going to utilize Kenrith's abilities in unexpected, deadly ways. With this deck, we're able to turn Kenrith's seemingly harmless abilities into deadly win conditions. But we'll tackle how we do that later. As with all Commander's Quarters decks, I'm going to take you through 10 different tactics that show you how the deck works and how we're going to win with it. First up, there's tactic number 1, prepare for the king. First up, there's Wayfarer's Bauble, which we can pay 2 to tap and sacrifice it to search our library for basic land and put in play tapped. Next up, there's Sakura Tribe Elder, which we can sacrifice to do the same. And then we're running Farseek, which can get us a plains, an island, a swamp, or a mountain into play tapped. And then Rampant Growth and Edge of Autumn can get us any of our basic lands in play tapped. Edge of Autumn is restricted though because we can only do it if we have 4 or fewer lands, but it also lets us cycle by sacrificing a land if we need to. And Harrow makes us sacrifice 1 land, but we get 2 basics into play untapped. And Springbloom Druid does the exact same thing, but those lands come into play tapped. Next up, there's Cultivate, which gets us 2 lands, 1 goes into our hand and 1 goes onto the battlefield tapped. And Grow from the Ashes can get us 1 into play untapped or 2 if we kicked it. And finally, there's Explosive Vegetation and Circuitous Root, which both can get us 2 basics into play tapped. Ramping is crucial for this deck, not only to fix our colors, but also to get ahead. But what are some other ways that we can really increase our mana production? Let's go over them now in tactic number 2, the Treasury. First up, there's Gearpoor Orrery, which says each player may play an additional land on each of their turns, and at the beginning of each player's upkeep, if that player has no cards in hand, that player draws 3 cards. So this might benefit everyone, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. Some people might see a card like this and think that we're a group hug deck, so that might make them less suspicious of our political schemes. Some other cards that can benefit everyone are Mana Flare and Dictate of Karametra. Both essentially do the exact same thing. They say whenever a player taps a land for mana, that player adds 1 mana of any type that land produced. Now most likely with Mana Flare, our opponents get to use its benefits first. Now again, that's not too big of a deal because we really want to seem non-threatening and helpful to other players. And again, the more mana that we have, the more abilities that we can use to make deals. And Dictate of Karametra might cost 2 more, but it also has Flash, so we can actually get the first use out of this if we want to. Some ways to ramp though that only benefit us come with Bounty of the Luxa and Frontier Siege. Bounty of the Luxa has, at the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, remove all flood counters from Bounty of the Luxa. If no counters were removed this way, put a flood counter on Bounty of the Luxa and draw a card, otherwise add colorless, green, blue. So essentially this is either going to draw us a card or give us free mana to use. And then with Frontier Siege, if we choose cons, at the beginning of each of our main phases, we add green to our mana pool. So essentially this provides us 4 free mana each turn to use. And finally there's Wilderness Reclamation, which can really make the most out of our lands. It says at the beginning of your end step, untap all lands you control. So essentially during our turn we can dump as much mana into spells or our commander's abilities as we want to and still have mana left over during our opponent's turns. In combination with one of our mana doublers, this gives us access to an incredible amount of mana. We've got some even more effective ways to help us make the most out of our commander's abilities. Let's go through them now in tactic number 3, Royal Prerogative. First up, there's Heartstone, which says, activated abilities of creatures cost 1 less to activate. This effect can't reduce the amount of mana and ability cost to activate to less than 1 mana. So except for our commander's first ability, it makes all the other ones cheaper. Now 1 mana might not seem like a lot, but that can really add up. Just think about it this way. Putting a +1/+1 counter on something now only costs a green. That's going to be half as much as it cost before. Paying 2 mana to gain 5 life, 3 mana to draw a card, or 4 mana to bring something back are much better rates. Now as good as this card is in this deck, there's one that's even better. And that's going to be our Golden Pig, which is the #1 card out of our 99. And the Golden Pig for this deck is Biomancer's Familiar. It's a 2/2 mutant for green-blue. It says, activated abilities of creatures you control cost 2 less to activate. This effect can't reduce the amount of mana and ability cost to activate to less than 1 mana. So this card is twice as effective as Heartstone. With this in play, our commander's first 3 abilities now only cost us 1 mana. Drawing a card is only going to cost us 2 mana, and bringing something back only costs 3. The amount of mana that this can save us throughout the game is absolutely incredible. It can allow us to activate a ton more abilities than we would have been able to. On top of that, since it's a creature, it's actually a good thing for this deck, because if one of our opponents happens to remove it, we can just use our commander's ability to bring it back. So essentially this is a durable way to save us a ton of mana and do some really powerful things with this deck. There's no other card in this deck that's nearly as impactful, and that's what makes it the Golden Pig. Now we want to use politics to protect ourselves as much as we can, but that's not always an option. So now let's move on to tactic number 4, Protect the Realm. First up, there's Spore Frog and Kami of False Hope, which we can sacrifice to prevent all combat damage that we dealt this turn. Now we can use these to save ourselves, or we can use these to save others for political favors too. On top of that, we can just keep getting these back with our commander if we want to. Once we have them in play, they're essentially a 5-mana repeatable fog. And Children of Corliss is similar but different. By sacrificing it, we gain life equal to the life that we've lost this turn. So this is kind of like a post-combat fog that can be more effective in some situations than others. But gaining life in this deck can actually be a win condition too, but we'll get to that later. For now, let's move on to other ways to protect ourselves, like Baird Steward of Argive and Archon of Absolution. Both of these say, creatures can't attack you or a planeswalker you control unless their controller pays 1 for each of those creatures. Although 1 mana might not seem like a lot, this can be a great way to disincentivize opponents from attacking us. If they can attack others for free, they're probably going to go in a different direction. A bigger way to discourage attacks can be Sphere of Safety. It says, creatures can't attack you or a planeswalker you control unless their controller pays X for each of those creatures, where X is the number of enchantments you control. We're running a good amount of enchantments to this deck, so this effect can get out of control quickly. But a way to essentially guarantee that certain players can't attack us is with Island Sanctuary. It says if you would draw a card during your draw step, instead you may skip that draw. If you do, until your next turn, you can't be attacked except by creatures with flying and/or island walk. Once we're set up properly, skipping that draw won't be a big deal. We can always just replace that draw for 4 mana with one of our commander's abilities. And being able to pay 4 mana to not be attacked by most creatures is a pretty big deal. But another way for us to control attacks is with Pramikon Sky Rampart. When it comes into play, we choose left or right. And then each player may attack only the nearest opponent in the chosen direction, and planeswalkers controlled by that opponent. So basically we can send the weaker opponent our way and the stronger opponent elsewhere. This can also be a fantastic political tool if used in the right way. And finally there's Resolute Archangel, which actually doesn't prevent attacks, but it can help us get our life back. When it comes into play, if our life total is less than our starting life total, it becomes equal to our starting life total. So this can gain us back a ton of life all at once, and our commander can even get this back from our graveyard with one of his abilities. Because of that, this is also a fantastic blocker because opponents aren't going to want to swing into it. If they happen to kill it, we can just pay that 5 mana, get it back onto the battlefield, and gain our life back. Now, gaining life is one of our commander's abilities, but this can do it in a faster way in a lot of situations. Drawing cards is also one of our commander's abilities, but we've got more effective ways of doing that too. Let's go through those ways now in tactic number 5, Drawn to Power. First up, there's Benthic Biomancer, which says, whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are put on Benthic Biomancer, draw a card, then discard a card. So essentially, every single time a +1/+1 counter comes onto this, we get to loot. And one of our commander's abilities just happens to be putting +1/+1 counters on things. So essentially for just 2 mana, we can keep growing this and loot. Now looting isn't card advantage, but it is card selection, which is still very effective. But we can get card advantage from something like Fathom Mage. It says, whenever a +1/+1 counter is put on Fathom Mage, you may draw a card. So now for 2 mana, we can just straight up draw a card instead of looting. In a similar way, this works with Generous Patron. When it enters the battlefield, you support 2, and whenever you put 1 or more +1/+1 counters on a creature you don't control, you draw a card. So again, by paying 2 mana and putting a +1/+1 counter on one of our opponent's creatures, we can draw a card. But perhaps the biggest way for us to draw cards with this deck is a very high-risk, high-reward play with Lich's Mastery. It has hexproof and says you can't lose the game. Whenever you gain life, draw that many cards. Whenever you lose life, for each 1 life you lost, exile a permanent you control or a card from your hand or graveyard. When Lich's Mastery leaves the battlefield, you lose the game. So thanks to our commander, essentially with this in play, we can pay 3 life to gain 5 mana and draw 5 cards. 3 mana for 5 cards is an absolutely absurd rate. Now we can start getting in trouble if we start to lose life, but again, there are plenty of ways for this deck to gain it to get those cards back. Outside of drawing cards, though, we've got some more effective ways of getting specific cards that we need. Let's go through them now in tactic number 6, Kingly Tutor. First up, there's Shared Summons, which lets us tutor for 2 creatures at instant speed. There are plenty of fantastic targets for this, including our Golden Pig. At instant speed, this can come out of absolutely nowhere and easily set us up to win. Next up, there's Final Parting, which says, search your library for 2 cards, put 1 into your hand and the other into your graveyard, then shuffle your library. So basically with this deck, this actually gets us 2 cards since our commander can bring a creature back from our graveyard. And because of that ability, we're also running Buried Alive. It says search your library for up to 3 creature cards, put them into your graveyard, then shuffle your library. So basically this is a 3 mana tutor for 3 creatures. And finally we have a card that's not actually a tutor but is still very effective in the stack. Altar of Dementia says sacrifice a creature, target player puts a number of cards equal to the sacrificed creature's power from the top of their library into their graveyard. Milling ourselves can be a very good thing for this deck. The more that we mill, the more likely we are to hit key creatures. On top of that, this allows us to sacrifice creatures at will. So basically if we have a creature with an enter the battlefield effect, we can sacrifice them, use our commander's ability to get it back to get that ETB again. In the right situation, this can really help us take over the game. Now our commander is very crucial to this deck, so we need some ways that we can protect him. So let's go through some ways that we can do that in tactic number 7, Save the King. First up, we're running Negate and Unwind, which each counter target non-creature spell. On top of that though, Unwind gets us our mana back by untapping 3 of our lands. And if we happen to have a mana doubler in play, it actually nets us mana. Next up there's Rewind, which is similar. It's going to counter target spell and untap up to 4 lands. And then we're running Swiftfoot Boots, which says equipped creature has hexproof and haste. Now the haste might not be all that relevant, but giving our commander hexproof is huge. So we're also going to be running Glaring Spotlight, which does multiple things for us. It says creatures your opponents control with hexproof can be the targets of spells or abilities you control as though they didn't have hexproof. And then by paying 3 and sacrificing Glaring Spotlight, creatures we control gain hexproof until end of turn and are unblockable this turn. Giving our entire team hexproof is huge, and while it might not seem like we're on the attack plane, at some point we can be. So making them unblockable and guaranteeing they get through are very powerful things. And don't sleep on that first effect that essentially negates hexproof. It can help for targeted removal as well as other tricks that we have up our sleeve. Next up there's Fanatical Devotion, which says sacrifice a creature, regenerate target creature. So on top of protecting our commander, this can be an efficient sacrifice outlet. Finally, a great way to protect our entire team though is with Dauntless Escort. It says sacrifice Dauntless Escort, creatures you control gain indestructible until end of turn. Again, since our commander can get this back, we essentially just pay 5 mana for indestructibility. Now, outside of protecting our own things, we need to make sure that we can deal with our opponent's things too. So it's time for us to move on to tactic number 8, Royal Decree. First up there's Fleshbag Marauder and Merciless Executioner, which each say when they enter the battlefield, each player sacrifices a creature. Playcrafter is similar. It says when it enters the battlefield, each player sacrifices a creature or planeswalker, and each player who can't discards a card. Any of these can be fantastic ways for us to control the board. We can sacrifice them to their own trigger and then bring them back as many times as we need to with our commander. A different way for us to deal with creatures comes with Biden of Thassa. By paying 1 and a blue and tapping it, creatures our opponents control attack this turn if able. This can be a fantastic political card for us, can really help us make some deals. We can force one of our opponents to attack into some really undesirable circumstances. And on top of that, it says whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you may draw a card. For the most part, we're not an aggressive deck, but at a certain point, we're going to be. And once we hit that point, this can get us a ton of card advantage. But 2 cards that are absolutely brutal in this deck are Cowardice and Dismiss into Dream. Cowardice says whenever a creature becomes the target of a spell or ability, return that creature to its owner's hand. Dismiss into Dream says each creature your opponents control is an illusion in addition to its other types and has, when this creature becomes the target of a spell or ability, sacrifice it. Like I mentioned before, we can turn our commander's harmless abilities into deadly ones. For just 1 into green, we can target any of our opponent's creatures. Cowardice is going to bounce them and Dismiss into Dream is going to make them sacrifice them. And repeatable creature removal for just 2 mana is absolutely absurd. And on top of that, we can actually use Cowardice to save our creatures too. If someone tries to kill our commander, we can simply bounce them back to our hand for 2 mana. Next up, we've got some ways to deal with artifacts and enchantments with Caustic Caterpillar and Reclamation Sage. And again, since we can sacrifice Caustic Caterpillar, we can actually keep getting it back with our commander. Finally, we've got 2 ways that can pretty much deal with anything with Beast Within and Generous Gift. Both of these are essentially the exact same card. They're going to destroy target permanent and its controller gets a 3/3. This is a trade that we're pretty much going to make every single day in Commander. Now, we've talked about ways to turn our commander's abilities against our opponents, but we can also turn their creatures against them too. Let's go through some ways now in tactic number 9, Turn Trader. First up, there's Mass Mutiny, which says, for each opponent, gain control of up to 1 target creature that player controls until end of turn, untap those creatures, they gain haste until end of turn. And then Molten Primordial does the exact same thing, but it's on a body so we can abuse it with our commander's ability. And Mob Roll can be even more impactful because it says choose 1. Gain control of all creatures with power 4 or greater until end of turn, untap those creatures that gain haste until end of turn. Or gain control of all creatures with power 3 or less until end of turn, untap those creatures that gain haste until end of turn. Our commander is able to bolster our opponent's armies by reanimating their creatures and giving them counters. And at a certain point, we can just take their creatures and take them out with them. A more flexible version of this comes with Reigns of Power. It says untap all creatures you control and all creatures target opponent controls. You and that opponent each gain control of all creatures the other controls until end of turn. Those creatures gain haste until end of turn. So we can use this to protect ourselves, or we can use it to swing someone's army at whoever we want. But perhaps the most effective out of all of these is Willbreaker. It says whenever a creature an opponent controls becomes the target of a spell or ability you control, gain control of that creature for as long as you control Willbreaker. Again, our commander has the ability to target any of our opponent's creatures for just 2 mana. And 2 mana for a mind control spell is absolutely unheard of. Even our opponent's creatures in their graveyards aren't safe. We can pay to reanimate that creature and then pay to gain control of it. Once we're set up, it's going to be very hard to stop us and too late for our opponents. But killing our opponents with their own creatures isn't the only way that we can win. Let's go through another devious way in tactic number 10, life lost. First up, there's Sanguine Bond and Defiant Bloodlord, which each do the exact same thing. They say whenever you gain life, target opponent loses that much life. So with our commander in play for just 3 mana, we can gain 5 life and make someone else lose 5. And if we have a cost reducer in our play like our Golden Pig, this is even more absurd, because at that point it's essentially 1 mana for a 10-point life swing. A similar way to take all of our opponents out at once is with Viscopa Guildmage. By paying 1 white black whenever we gain life this turn, each opponent loses that much life. So not including a cost reducer in play, to activate this is 3 mana, and then activate our commander is another 3 mana. For 6 mana, we're going to gain 5 life and drain all of our opponents for 5 each, which is 15 total. If we've got more mana to spend, we drain them for even more. And finally, there's Tainted Remedy, which is a fantastic way of preventing our opponents from coming back and a great way to kill them. It says if an opponent would gain life, that player loses that much life instead. So again, with this in play, they can't gain any life back, and we can also just drain them for 5 whenever we want. I think Kenrith has a lot of potential as a fantastic political commander. He has a ton of relevant abilities that can be used in a lot of different ways. But now that we've gone through the spells in this deck, let's go on to the mana base. First up, we've got Command Tower, which can tap for any of our colors, and Exotic Orchard can tap for any of our colors most of the time. Next up, there's Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse, both of which we can tap and sacrifice them to search our library for basic land and put in play tapped. And then there's Rocky Tar Pit, which enters the battlefield tapped, and we can tap and sacrifice it to search our library for a swamp or mountain card and put it onto the battlefield, and then we shuffle our library. Next up, we're running 3 of the Panoramas with Naya, Jund, and Bant. Each taps for a color, so we can pay 1 to tap and sacrifice them to search for 1 of 3 lands. And then there's Warp Landscape, which can tap for a color, so we can pay 2 to tap and sacrifice it to get a basic land into play tapped. Next up, there's Blighted Woodland, which can tap for a color, so we can pay 3 and a green to tap and sacrifice it to get 2 basic lands into play tapped. And then there's Mirrored Landscape, which enters the battlefield tapped and taps for a color, so we can pay 2 to tap and sacrifice to go get 2 basic lands of the same type and put it in play tapped. Next up, there's Crows and Verge, which enters the battlefield tapped, taps for a color, so we can pay 2 to tap and sacrifice to go get a forest and a plains into play tapped. And finally, we've got 26 basic lands. 9 of those are going to be a forest, 5 will be islands, 5 will be plains, 4 will be swamps, and 3 will be mountains. And now that we've gone through every single card in this deck, let's do a quick price check. A quick reminder that our deck costs are calculated using TCGplayer optimization, optimizing with even heavily played and damaged cards because those cards need a home too. The average Kenrith EDH rec deck will set you back $545.97. Our deck is going to be much more affordable, coming in at $49.75. Keep in mind that neither of these costs include the commander because at this point that commander's cost is over 10. Again, the price of this deck is the price that I got for it on the day that I'm recording. If you want to see a breakdown of this deck's cost, check out the link in the description. Keep in mind that prices can and will fluctuate and change over time. But with these deck costs, I want to be as transparent as I possibly can. Again, Commander's Quarters decks are about to be tuned and focused within their budget, but there are always ways that we can improve on them. So let's go through some reasonable upgrades now to see what some of those ways just might be. First up, let's add in Lightning Greaves and take out Glaring Spotlight. And then we're going to add in Selfless Spirit and take out Fanatical Devotion. Next up, we're putting in Ghostly Prison and taking out Kami of False Hope. And then let's add in Illusionist Bracers and take out Gearpoor Orrery. Next, we're putting in Seedborn Muse and taking out Bounty of Alexa. And finally, let's add in Insurrection and take out Mass Mutiny. And with that, this show is coming to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your thoughts on this deck tech are. And make sure that you're following us on social media for more updates and sneak peeks on future episodes. Links to our social media accounts can be found in the description. Also in the description below is a link to the Commander's Quarters Patreon page, and I just want to say a quick thank you to the patrons who have subscribed so far. There are many benefits to being a patron for the Commander's Quarters, including being able to vote on future commanders for deck techs. There's even a general level tier where you get your own personalized deck tech dedicated to you. I truly couldn't do this without all of your support, so from the bottom of my heart, thank you. If you haven't already, make sure that you like and subscribe to the channel. Here at the Commander's Quarters, we're all about budget commander. So while you're at it, go ahead and check out some of our other types of episodes. And with that, I'm out of here. Thanks again and have a good one.